I don't think microlearning is a solution to employees being overwhelmed. It's just how are we going to approach this with the mindset of being minimalistic, right?
Some people were using like the term microlearning to describe what I would say would be like an intervention or a hook.
Now, a lot of the conversation is revolving around chatbots or AI agents, right?
And I kind of call it the flood risk, right? So there's a bit of a risk with a microlearning strategy that if you're not careful, you can cause fatigue or you can undermine the goal of helping people.
One of the big steps we take is essentially minimalizing the course, what's absolutely necessary for the learning objective, the outcome, to actually drive the behavior shift we're trying to see. Hi, everybody. Erick Prospero here with the Microlearning Lab. Today, we're going to be discussing or somewhat myth-busting myths tied to microlearning effectiveness. I am very biased towards myths. This is not myths, but microlearning, and maybe some myths too. This is a channel dedicated to microlearning, and hopefully I have some to contribute to the conversation, but the true expert here is Kirstie Greany. Kirstie has over 2 decades of experience tied to assisting enterprises develop strategies that produce measurable results. Kirstie, can you tell us a little more about yourself, your organization, and what you do?
Sure, thanks. And great to be here, Eric. I'm Kirstie Greany. I'm head of learning strategy at Alucidat. And as you said, I've got 2 decades under my belt, which, let's go with experience rather than feeling old. Being a learning strategist, consultant, and engagement specialist, working with global organizations to help shape their learning strategies and programs over the years. So in case people don't know what Alucidat is, Alucidat itself is an authoring platform that's created for high-scale organizations. So those are the kind of organizations we tend to work with. And I started working with them to set up their consultancy team a few years ago, and then have shifted into looking at how I can help provide guidance and ideas and tips and resources across our customer base and beyond, also out into the L&D community. And I run a podcast, I run regular manager meetups, and I'm lucky enough to have conversations like this, which help seed more thinking just to enable us to help more people.
Wonderful. And we're going to ask for the link to the podcast. We can include it in the comments as well. And so onto the topic. I know we have a list of 4 items to discuss, but what's a myth that you tend to laugh at when it comes to e-learning or microlearning in general?
It's, we're going to be talking a lot about myths today. So for this one, maybe I slightly swerved the question slightly by thinking about what just makes me laugh or maybe even cry when it comes to, the experience with lots of learning projects. So I think the idea of that providing content or a course means like job done. And that can stem from not even investigating what the impact was, if there's, from a learning intervention. And I think my kind of biggest bugbear, which, maybe makes me laugh, but mostly makes me cry, is when people don't dig into the real problem at the beginning and really think through what's needed to help solve that. And it still happens so much that, so it's a mixture between laughing and crying.
Understood. No, I completely understand when we're consulting clients, they invest all these resources, time, money, and effort into building something out, and with almost no follow-up plan in terms of actually seeing if it's effective, right?
Exactly.
I love the commentary there. Now, let's jump into myth number 1. I'm excited to hear it.
Okay. Yeah, maybe before I talk about the myths, it's good to explain why I've focused on this. And I think if it's okay to say so on this podcast, I won't get toughed out. I was probably a little bit of a microlearning skeptic. I was interested to find out why it was still so popular. We run a lot of surveys across our customer base, which is sort of 300 of the world's largest organizations. And microlearning kept on coming up, right? And, it's popular, it's out there, and there's lots of platforms. So I guess I was keen to find out, really why, the genuine reasons for why it is popular, how much of that was kind of on solid ground, and how much was kind of the bandwagon people were jumping on. So I had some conversations with people who were doing it and listened to the truths and also kind of landed on some myths that I thought maybe I could share today. So the 4 big myths that I can talk around, which I'll go into in more detail, is that one is that there's a unilateral definition of what we all mean when we say microlearning. And that might be something you've got an opinion on too. I'm sure you do. The second one is that it fixes the content overwhelm problem. The third is that it's inherently more engaging. And the fourth is that it can be used for everything and anything. So caveat this, that I will also share what I think is best practice under each of those areas. So I'm not going to be going into doom and gloom and get all negative on you. But should we dive into the first myth?
Love it. I'm excited. I think this is one of my favorite approaches too, just because we often get questions in terms of how long, what's the best approach, what is microlearning? And so I would love to hear your perspective on this. Okay,
brilliant. So at the roundtable that I held with different learning managers and leaders, when I asked what everybody thought, what came to mind when people tried to define microlearning, you can expect we heard the words, things like short, digestible, and targeted. There were some common descriptions that we heard. But when I dug into how people were using it, the range of applications was vast. And that's not necessarily a problem, but it was interesting, right? So some people are using it for just-in-time resources, those in-the-moment resources that you need something right there and then to help you, go and get a resource. So it could be something that's like a quick guide during a live call to help you with a customer. Other people are using it much more as space learning and kind of reinforcement, delivering skills or perhaps onboarding gradually and over time, layering in content and weaving in some practice. That sounds good to me as well as an approach. Some people were using the term microlearning to describe what I would say would be like an intervention or a hook, putting some a kind of learning moment or maybe even just some engagement, like an ad for something, could be a video story, into people's way. So it could be pushed out on Slack or on Teams to really hook them in. They were calling that microlearning. And other people were using kind of microlearning to describe personalized learning journeys. So I didn't hear one unilateral definition. And that might explain why so many people say that they're doing it and are interested in it as well, because actually it's breaking down into different kinds of definitions. So as I said, I think they're all valid. They fix different kinds of problems and they support performance development in different ways. I think that really people are using microlearning to describe not a course. That's kind of where I landed, because it was interesting that, you don't have to use the word microlearning to describe those kind of approaches necessarily to learning. But yeah, what definition do you use?
We tend to be fairly neutral on it. And a lot of times our clients have multiple definitions. So for example, for customer education, it's a relatively big segment of ours. If we're building out a certification program for customers using a SaaS-based platform, in those specific instances, microlearning could be a specific microlearning module learning objective covered within a course. And we're leveraging some form of advanced media to cover the topic, either a story, a case study, a simulation. But what's nice about this approach too is that same microlearning module or unit can be used by the customer service team later when they're answering questions. So our approach has been somewhat neutral as to what it is. And I love the simple definition of not a course, right? Just because that's technically our approach. It's something that's just shorter, bite-sized, that covers an individual learning topic that can be used in multiple use cases. Actually, and we try to push our clients to do that too, just because even if we're building a long-form course comprised of multiple microlearning units, we want them to use and place those microlearning units in other areas that are a lot more accessible as well, not necessarily just on the LMS.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, so kind of multi-channel, different contexts kind of chimes with you there.
Yeah, and that's one of the big drivers behind our bias towards it, just because it's just usable, right? I mean, it's something that you can take out of a course, and we often script microlearning units with that intention in mind, either within a certain component of a larger course or something that can be used just in time if it's necessary. With that being said, we conducted a similar type of survey with our clients too as to, hey, why did you reach out to us? What's the interest here? A lot of the feedback we got was our learners just don't care about the content, right? They have competing priorities, not just other learning material, but they have a job. With a remote workforce, they have things going on at home that we have to consider. And so we want to make our learning as efficient, as effective as possible. So we want to respect their time, but then at the same time, put a lot of effort into smaller learning packages. So it's more of a utility aspect as well.
Yeah, I uncovered the same thing. I was asking why people had gone, short did come up in the definition, right? I think that goes with the term microlearning. So why that? And I think the challenges that I heard is that training times can sometimes fall outside of billable hours or contracted time. It can fall outside of union agreements in some organizations, or it's given little or no budget. So, for example, that can be true in retail, for example, for frontline workers. So it's no wonder that it's, people have taken hold of it and grasped it in that context. It was important for me to hear that because I was coming in thinking, is everyone just jumping on the bandwagon kind of because it's trendy or because we think that short is better per se, So I think that was good for me to understand that, and help me, I guess, give validity to the use of it.
And I love how you started this too, just because there's waves of fads in e-learning, right? I mean, every 3-4 years, it seems like AR, VR is kind of like the next big thing. Now, a lot of the conversation is revolving around chatbots or AI agents, right? Like this is the new meta of, and then there was the metaverse too. So I just thought this was a user-friendly oriented approach. That's not necessarily a wave. Yeah, it gets popular sometimes, but more of a style of learning that people prefer.
Yeah, I mean, and I think it might bring me onto some of the other myths that I've got here about like when you might use it, and when you might consider not as well. And so I think that, I think it makes sense to go shorter in busy lifestyles, but equally, let's think about when it works and when it maybe doesn't as well.
Love it. All right. So let's jump into the other myths because I'm curious to see.
Okay.
I think I might have, hopefully, I mean, of course, some disagreement, or I mean, maybe not. Now you're a smart person, so I tend to follow the smartest in the room.
That's fine.
So, Kirstie, let's hear about myth number 2.
Okay, so myth 2 is that microlearning solves the overwhelm issue. So, in the face of overwhelming employees with like long form courses, lots of people have shifted to microlearning to reduce the load, right? To make things smaller and shorter, and in theory more digestible. But what I also heard is that some people were getting feedback that they were overwhelming employees in a different way. Like you can still overwhelm people with bite-sized lessons or bite-sized content. It's just a different kind of overload. And I kind of called it the flood risk, right? So there's a bit of a risk with a microlearning strategy that if you're not careful, you can cause fatigue or you can undermine the goal of helping people particularly if you scattergun things, if you let unrelated topics pile up, if you're putting out too much, and if it's too much push and not enough pull. So it needs a strategy, I think, to really make it work. So one of the customers that I spoke to, like after hearing the feedback and sort of realizing they'd gone too far with kind of pushing out microlearning, that they picked kind of key themes and focused in those on those for like maybe running them for a kind of over a month or so for a certain cohort, running it a bit like a campaign, which is music to my ears because I have one foot in marketing and one foot in learning design. And that kind of worked better, right? Because then you're using your multi-channel approach, you're using your kind of moments of somebody's attention wisely, and you're building up a story as well. So I think that automatically, just by switching over to microlearning and thinking, let's push out more content, which I think is a strategy that hopefully no learning team just does willy-nilly, then it can actually make overwhelm worse if you're not careful.
I definitely agree with the approach. I mean, having the same amount of content in the form of microlearning doesn't solve the overwhelming approach, right? I mean, if it's 2 hours of recorded webinars and you're trying to break that down into 2 hours of individual microlearning units, I know one of the big steps we take is essentially minimalizing the course, what's absolutely necessary for the learning objective, the outcome, to actually drive the behavior shift we're trying to see. And it's always a bit difficult because it turns into a debate with business unit leaders, subject matter experts as to what's essential. And so I don't think microlearning is a solution to employees being overwhelmed. It's just how are we going to approach this with the mindset of being minimalistic, right? What is absolutely essential for the results we're trying to see? And it's easier to say that than do it, just because everyone has their own bias, right? You'll have managers that want to prioritize this portion of content as opposed to maybe somebody in compliance who's pushing for this portion. And a lot of times what we do is just negotiating with clients as to, okay, great. Like we have this adapted scope, right? We have this expected user experience in terms of what's essential for the goal. And then we have to convince them, okay, how much of this can we cut out and just focus on the business problem or the actual thing we're trying to solve?
Yeah. Yeah, and I think it's true for any format of learning, right? Any approach, right? You have to have, you've got to have your stakeholder management there. You've got to have a clear strategy and a clear kind of, what good looks like. You're setting the bar for like the kind of approach you need to use in a certain situation. So I think microlearning isn't necessarily a strategy, it's a format. So you still need to have all that thinking in place, right? You still have to have the goals and targets and the advice at the ready to work with stakeholders on. So I don't think it's microlearning's fault. I think that, unfortunately, some people jumped on the bandwagon thinking, let's just blast out loads of short stuff because that's what we're hearing is like popular, and that is where it doesn't work so much.
Yeah, that makes sense. Or they'll let their own biases towards user experience, right? I mean, everyone goes to YouTube for learning. There's, content there, it's typically 4 to 5 minutes. I think TikTok videos, I'm not on TikTok yet, but I've heard that they're even shorter. So I can see how that can influence the need or just that general bias towards microlearning. Love it. But let's jump into myth number 3.
So myth number 3 is very connected to what we were just talking about. So is that myth that microlearning is inherently more engaging. Again, it comes back to just because it's short doesn't mean that you immediately engage people better. You're probably in with a better chance than a really long form course. But microlearning is not a magic wand for engagement. If learners don't care about the topic or you haven't set your aims on motivating them or finding out what's relevant to them, how to involve them and have good people-centered design, then whether it's big or small, it's not going to hit the mark. It's not going to get people switched on or interested. And they have to be switched on in order to learn, right? So whilst the end goal isn't engagement, you need the hearts and minds to be tuned in. You need that commitment to learn. Otherwise, it's not going to happen. So again, I think that's where some of the cases where people were using what they called microlearning as kind of awareness raising, like learning moments in their own right, but putting them out onto other platforms such as Slack or Teams or, but not on the LMS and finding people where they were. That was a good case of being able to hook people in and give them learning moments there and then. Then it's like kind of what happens next. So then that's where, you probably want your spaced learning to kick in. But yeah, it's an obvious thing to say. Like now I'm saying it out loud, just because it's short doesn't mean it's engaging. But again, I think some people people like short stuff, like you were saying. People are loving YouTube shorts. People are loving TikTok. If we make our stuff the same length, people are going to be engaged. Well, no, not necessarily,
And I love your comment on engagement not being the end goal too. But there are a lot of metrics that you can measure. What I love about engagement is there's a lot of ways to measure it, right? Even off platform, there's just a ton of things that it becomes very difficult to actually measure the impact of the actual content. But fortunately and unfortunately, engagement, even though it's not the end goal, it's fairly easy to measure in terms of completion rates, assignments completed, or even user feedback surveys. And typically, actually, most of the time, our microlearning content performs very well. But the reason it's not just because it's short, it's mostly because there's a lot more invested in terms of story structure, practicality, selling the why, and a lot more resources condensed into this bite-sized microlearning unit. So I definitely see the correlation there, but it's just a bit frustrating how the one metric that's not necessarily as important. Of course, we drive it because we try to respect user experience. It's a big priority for us. There's always easy ways to measure.
Mm-hmm. It's an important part of the picture. It's your signals. It's your signals that you're getting people there, and that they're using it. And ideally, they might be sharing it on, for example. That's a great metric. If someone's telling someone else about something, that is your NPS. So I'm a fan of engagement metrics. I know also then to look at impact metrics and go further, as I'm sure you do.
Love it. All right. So myth number 4.
Okay. So myth number 4 is, and we can have a debate over this one maybe, but is that microlearning works for anything and everything, in terms of your performance or learning objectives. And the reason this one came up is because we started a debate in the roundtable whether microlearning allowed for deep learning. So some skills or habits, a lot of skills and habits, take time, they take focus, and they take hands-on practice to develop. They can also take commitment. They can be hard work. It's not all about being easy and quick. They might need reflective, in-depth thought. So it depends on what the skill or the performance gap is, that's being dealt with. But because microlearning by its nature is short, yes, you can piece it together and create spaced learning kind of campaigns or journeys. Is whether within each moment it allows the depth necessary sometimes for kind of more advanced skill training, for some difficult thinking, kind of grey area exploration. So somebody said that their biggest worry about it was that it could reduce everything to consumption, rather than it necessarily being about kind of deep thought. So I'm keen for your thoughts on that, but I would kind of fall off my chair really if we thought that one approach would work in every situation anyway, because as good learning designers, right, we should always be thinking about what's appropriate.
That's where I would change the definition. So microlearning in terms of just a small amount of content, definitely not useful for more complex topics. But if we were to, one of our definitions of microlearning is just being focused on one specific learning objective and outcome. And that could be a 40-minute topic, right? It's there. It ties to your first myth of what the definition of microlearning is. So I don't feel comfortable saying microlearning's for everything. It's definitely, we have a clear bias towards it, right? And we use it, but we've run into issues with some of our compliance training providers. We work with a lot of clients that develop content, monetize content, a lot of associations that it's a weird request, but they're developing content to support CEHs. And the philosophy of, hey, let's minimalize this course, cover only what's essential. It's a little difficult when you're trying to focus on a series of topics, but at the same time, keep a certain length because that's what people are paying for to support a certification that they're providing. So I wouldn't say microlearning is for everything, but I think it still can be used for everything if you change the definition. And then one of our favorite approaches are at least generalities about microlearning is the fact that it's typically the use and the focus of one learning objective. Mm-hmm. So if we're covering specifically one topic, even if it's a long-form course with a series of spaced learning objectives, we're still leveraging microlearning in that course. So I mostly agree, right? Like I don't think I can say microlearning's for everything or every project or the silver bullet. It's definitely we're going to change our definition of microlearning and how we approach it. And again, I think it might just be an issue of nomenclature as well. Yeah,
I would agree with that. And by saying that, I'm not saying, hey, instead, then let's wheel in those massive courses that take, hours to click through. That's not the way either. I think it's just recognizing that sometimes, although time is a barrier, a genuine one for workplace learning, and people say they don't have enough time to learn, we also know that some learning takes time. And so, ideally we'd find a spaced way to do that, which would allow some challenge, practice, some reflection, maybe some social learning, maybe some coaching, so that it would have a blended approach to it that would get you as near as possible as you can. And then it might need some deeper moments as well.
I definitely love that approach. And I think one of the challenges we have too is just the definition of microlearning. One of the most general definitions is just the focus on one specific learning objective and outcome. And at that point, it doesn't necessarily matter the length, the type of activity that's happening. Now, with that definition, just the focus of one learning objective and outcome tied to a business result, would that change your perspective on whether if it's useful more often? It's a weird question.
I think that, no, it's a good question. Yeah. I mean, I still think, it depends how people are breaking down the learning objectives, right? And how useful that is to, so obviously what we're interested in is the ultimate performance change or the performance increase, or the skill kind of upskilling, that somebody might get. So yeah, I guess it's like whether that learning objective when it's broken down is useful in its own right, in isolation of context and conversation. And I would say that about any form of digital learning, right, is how much does it make sense to do something in isolation before context is needed, before practice is needed, etc., to make sense of it. And sometimes our obsession to break things down, it makes sense, like to understand the learning objectives, but our obsession to break down and treat them separately can sometimes miss some of the connections between some of the learning that can be there as well. So yes and no. I think it kind of depends. Yeah. So am I allowed to be on the fence?
Perfect. No, I get it. These are tough questions. I definitely appreciate the approach. And we tend to develop a lot of content for external learners. Actually, our largest customer base is specifically associations. So they're developing content for their certification programs. They're essentially monetizing it. So their metrics are always a bit different, right? Their user experience, NPS scores are very important. So that's where we are building content a little more for user experience, and we're not necessarily like the other challenge too is even though we push them to have clear defined goals in terms of measurable impact, there's just no way of collecting it at one of their corporate clients' bases, right? They can't go there. And so in the context of microlearning, our definitions change in terms of how we focus content, how we approach it. And again, it's always easy, at least on my side, to not be definitive or just change the definition when it's convenient.
Yeah, that's kind of where I got to as well, right? With the first point is, I think it allowed people to have a way to shift away from those big bulky courses and give a name to whatever that was at the time. I think that the power is not in tying it down to a specific time. It's not saying microlearning is anything under 2 minutes, because time is not a measure of quality and impact.
How do you feel? I know this is an extra question, but how do you feel about the definition of just the focus on one specific learning objective or topic tied to a business goal?
So, you mean boiling down a module to deal with one objective within a course?
Like tying a microlearning, the definition tied to that more so on the type of experience, the time, the requirement.
I think, it kind of relates to maybe what I was trying to say before, but maybe didn't put it across as clearly as I could have, which is that I think that that context really matters for learning, that the social aspects of learning really, really matter to kind of bring it to life, and practice does. So as long as the boiling down gives a holistic experience in its own right, then I think that can work. If the boiling down is a learning objective which is too simplified and too siloed and kind of breaks the context or the connections people need to make, then I think I would be like, yeah, okay, well, show me some evidence around that. So I think it's all about what's the experience like when you boil that down? And it can absolutely be done. It can be done within microlearning, it can be done in other formats as well. But so it's all about how that goes in there.
Love it. Awesome. So those were the four myths. We typically wrap these calls up with 2 questions. Who is somebody you look up to in the industry, as well as what's something that you're excited about the industry in general?
Okay, so there's lots of people that I look up to in the industry, but Laurie Nars-Hoffman is somebody that I admire greatly for giving advice that's bold and practical and often funny and cuts through the noise. I also have a bit of a LinkedIn crush on Lavinia from Offbeat, who provides really great and useful resources. A lot of the time, her and her team are very prolific. They're also really nicely branded, which I know I shouldn't call out, but they're aesthetically pleasing, and they boil things down really, really clearly for learning managers and learning leaders out there.
Wonderful. Now, what's something you're excited about in the industry that's happening?
I think that the thing that's getting me really excited is probably data. So data, of course, is not new, and it's been a kind of the elephant in the room, if you like, for L&D for years as something we need to focus more on, the call for focus on measurement. But I think now with the shifts to allow tech integrations to happen more easily and the power that AI brings, that data is going to become our currency a lot more in L&D. It's going to show up where the performance or skills gaps are in a business. Hopefully it will do away with random or assumed training requests that aren't based on evidence or data. And of course, it will show what's working from a learning point of view in closing those gaps or those skills needs. So it also means there's nowhere to hide for L&D. But I think that's a good thing. I'm excited about it. I think it's a really good time to kind of collaborate with the business, who hopefully will all be a bit more aligned around the data. So I think that's an exciting trend.
Love it, Kirstie. Thank you so much for the time Thank you so much for the time today. What's the best way for people to get a hold of you? Where can they find more information on what you do, Alucidat Learning as well?
Great, thank you for that. So LinkedIn is probably the best way to find me. So I'm Kirstie Greany at LinkedIn. And there you'll find me shout out whenever there's a new podcast release for Learning at Large. We're having a roundtable event, and also where I share lots of insights and guides. So yeah, LinkedIn's a winner. Otherwise, you can check out the podcast Learning at Large on your podcast player.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for the time today, and have a great day.
Thank you so much.
Want to learn more about microlearning best practices? We've got you covered. Check out the video cards for more related content. Don't forget to subscribe for weekly tips and explore the description for a curated list of resources to continue your e-learning journey.